Welcome to a brand new episode of the Spiraling Podcast. I am your host, Jackson Wallace. I got a kind of a sub here today. Okay, so we have a little thing going on. Jason is not feeling well. He's not feeling super good. But we have longtime guest Chelsea Casciola joining us. Chelsea, how are you this morning?
I'm great.
Good to have you. Thanks for coming, subbing in out of the bullpen. We sure appreciate that as Jason's kind of recovering. But we have another guest, first guest of the 2021 season, Gordon Corsetti. Gordon is a public speaker, referee, nerd, and a depressive who has developed workshops with the goal of helping people learn about how and why they think and demonstrate techniques that they can use to de-stress, quiet the mind, and better manage their daily lives. He is the founder of MentallyAgile.com and our next guest on the show, and also a vest aficionado. How are you doing, Gordon?
I'm doing quite well, Jackson. Thank you for that energetic introduction. Looking forward to this talk.
Oh, good. Hey, we're super glad to have you here. I was mentioning before in the pre-show, I felt so bad, man, because like before we were planning to have you on earlier, then we had to kind of delay and pump the brakes a little bit, but we finally got you back on, and so I'm super happy that you're here, man.
Same here. Let's get rolling.
First question is, I mentioned this in the intro. So I was going through your website, and I saw that you call yourself a vest aficionado, seeing that you're wearing one today. All right. Can you explain to our listeners a little bit just how important the vest is?
Yeah, the vest has turned into, as I got more into public speaking, a bit of of my uniform on stage or digitally now on screen.
Yeah.
So I've spent years as a competitive athlete, put on a uniform, go out and play. As a referee, put on stripes. It gets me in the right mindset to do whatever I'm doing.
Sure.
And as I got into public speaking, I'm like, you know what? I need a uniform. And I kind of always felt that I was born outside the wrong decade or in the wrong generation.
Yeah.
And my style's a little bit more dapper on that end. And I watch a lot of Peaky Blinders, and I enjoyed the scally cap as well. So I'm like, you know what? I think a vest will do well, and it worked for me. And that's what I wear on stage and when I'm presenting and doing podcasts. Just puts me in the right mindset.
I love that, man. I love that. I think I might need to add a vest to my repertoire. Okay.
I highly recommend it.
It's good for everything. I mean, you can wear a vest to any event, right? Yeah. Business casual, you're good to go. Right?
Yeah, it looks great, and I got extra pockets, so I got little mementos or a snack or something.
Sure, those are more handy than you think. Little extra pocket. By the way, guys, everybody out there listening, if you have a little extra pocket, it's super helpful. But all right, man, maybe you can go ahead and maybe one good thing that we love about this podcast is we encourage our guests to come on here and just kind of tell their story. You know what I mean? They have a platform to come in and just kind of, expand on their thoughts and everything. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about yours?
Certainly. So I am 32 now, raised in Georgia, and started experiencing depressive symptoms at around 15 years old, and dealing with depression primarily, and then to a lesser extent anxiety, from 15 until still to this day.
Yeah.
The challenge that I ran into at a younger age is I didn't know what was going on mentally in my head. I didn't have a sense that anything was wrong, so to speak. So I also didn't have a vocabulary to explain what it was I was thinking to the people that cared about me. So I was both literally and figuratively in the dark with this. And to give you a sense of just kind of where my headspace was at 15, 16 years old, and I'm having these recurring thoughts of I'm worthless, I don't deserve life, nobody loves me, I'm a burden to other people. These thoughts kept on gaining intensity and gaining frequency in my everyday and weighing me down significantly. But I was under a misapprehension that this was the natural consequence of growing into an adult. I felt that everybody else was dealing with these same things, teachers, parents, my older peers, whatever, and that they were dealing with these same thoughts that I was dealing with, but they were clearly dealing with it so much better than I was. Like, they were smiling, they were doing stuff, they were being successful in the activities they chose to do, and I was barely hanging on by my fingernails. And that led me to keep that very internal and develop some very unhealthy coping mechanisms along with that. And I learned a lot of behaviors that worked in the short term, But long-term effects, I'm still dealing with some of the learned behaviors and habits that I established at that young age, and a lot of the therapy I've been in over the last 15 years has been working to kind of remove some of that. But I had my first suicidal episode at 18, at the tail end of my senior year of high school. It was an aborted attempt. A friend interacted with me. If folks want to dive deep into that story, you can Google "Lacrosse Saved My Life," a story of friendship and survival. That's on Lacrosse Magazine. That's how I got putting my story out there a few years ago publicly has gotten me now into mental health and suicide prevention advocacy work.
Yeah.
So that is what I'm passionate about, is now teaching young people and also their families just kind of the warning signs of suicidality, but also better ways to manage depression, anxiety, the ways in which the human brain thinks, whether or not you have a diagnosable mental illness or not. So that's I say I've tested these things to a fairly extreme level. I know they work. So here's kind of how it's worked for me, and give it a go. Which is why I enjoy doing these kind of podcasts, because I get to share to different audiences the fact that we're all human, we all have brains, so this stuff crosses age gaps and ethnic gaps and cultural gaps,
bunch of different demographics. Oh yeah,
it's one of those things. Like, I never don't have an audience, because this is universal stuff.
Yeah.
So from 18, I came off of that. I got into college. I had a weird, rocky time in that. It was not a good space for me mentally, and I'm also at the worst decision-making period of my life at 18, 19, 20 years old. And so for the most of my early and mid-20s was just rocky, of regular hospitalizations, frequent suicide attempts, notably by hanging, by overdose, and by a handgun.
Wow. Yeah.
And those, each time after those, I wound up back in another hospital for a couple of weeks, and back into another round of fairly intensive inpatient and outpatient psychotherapy. And over that whole intervening period, a lot of different medications and medication combinations to try to figure out what was working for me. And the thing that I ran into, which took me a long time to learn, was that you can't cold turkey these medications. They don't work well on that front, and then the brain suddenly doesn't have these feel-good chemicals or these boosters, and it doesn't know what the heck's going on, and then you just take a dive, which is what precipitated many of my suicidal episodes. And so that was most of my 20s, was dealing with a great deal of severe depression and social anxiety, and keeping this still very close to the vest. Like, not a lot of folks really knew on that front. And then I wound up moving to Baltimore to work at U.S. Lacrosse, and that became a very safe place with a lot of trusted coworkers and friends that I made, that allowed me to kind of share a little bit of that darkness inside of me and what I was going on. And I had one of the worst panic attacks of my life up there at a friend's wedding, and that led to a 6-month hospitalization, and that slowly got me. I learned a lot more about myself in that process. And then a move, kind of taking things to the present now, a move back to Georgia to be closer to my family and friends, one for just personal satisfaction on that, but also just for my own well-being. It's a stronger social safety net for me, which has been a big cornerstone of my ongoing recovery, what I call my permanent recovery from depression. And coming back, I experienced only good things, and the brain doesn't really distinguish between good stress or bad stress. It's all stress. And so I had so much good stuff going on, my brain kind of freaked out, and I wound up back in the hospital, this time at Emory, and I had a whole bunch of doctors saying, "Hey, would you like to try electroconvulsive therapy?" And I'm like, "Well, I've tried everything else. Let's give this a go." And that's still one of the most effective methods for getting people out of a depressive crater rapidly, and that has since pushed my suicidal thinking, that, let's just say conservatively, from 15 until, let's say, last year. Last year, I would have a suicidal thought every day, if not more, specific, vague, whatever, sometimes minute by minute. And that ECT treatment pushed those thoughts into the periphery of my mind and lessened the frequency of it. So this past year, I've been ecstatic to have weeks go by without realizing that I haven't thought about killing myself, number one. But two, even when those things pop up, they're much less intense. And so now the techniques and the therapies and the habits good coping skills that I've developed over the last 15 years are proving much more effective, because my brain has a little bit more space to work with those. And now in the last 2 years of doing two and a half years of doing advocacy work with mental agility and my website, mentallyagile.com, and podcast interviews and trainings and workshops and talking to schools, it's an opportunity for me to continue my therapeutic journey in still a way that I can control, because I can control what's coming out of my mouth and what I share and all that.
Yeah, sure.
But I get to now take the worst aspects of my life and finally be able to put a positive spin on them and for other people's benefit. So that does a lot of lifting for my soul, so to speak, and does a lot of good for keeping me in a healthy and forward-thinking mindset.
Wow, man, that's a lot. That's a lot to unpack there, man. Well, number one, I'm glad you're feeling better now. I'm glad you're doing better, and the thoughts are a little less intense and less frequent. Chelsea, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. If you sound like you maybe had a question or something to follow up with him.
No, I do have a question.
Okay.
But so my background, I worked in the mental health field for about 7 years, predominantly with substance abuse. So I'm in recovery myself. Those that have listened to our show know that I've got 10 years sober. But with addiction comes a lot of the same characteristics. You know, you go through different spells of depression. Obviously, instead of killing yourself drug-wise, you want to just do it fast so you don't have to live that way anymore. And, you know, I've lost a lot of friends due to suicide. Unfortunately, being in recovery myself, as well as working in the field, I've lost a lot of clients as well. And so one of the things that I'm curious to hear your intake on is, and this comes from, you know, me personally feeling these things in the past, but also having clients and others that I know feel the same way, is, you know, when you're in that depression, in the midst of it, you know, it's this constant reel of lies, you know, that nobody's going to understand. You can't tell anybody these things that are going through your head. I've gotten to the point where I actually went to the emergency room knowing that I needed to be put on medication again. And, you know, the doctor was like, do you have a plan? And I was like, that's a loaded question. I'm not trying to get hospitalized. I'm here. I'm not going to act on it. I know what I need to be on. You know, so I guess my question to you is, you know, when you're in the bottom of the barrel, you know, and feeling, you know, like nobody will understand, it's a feeling of loneliness that only those that have experienced it can understand, right? So what would your response be to someone that's in, you know, the midst of that, of nobody's going to understand, nobody's ever felt like this, you know, as far as the suicidal ideations?
Well, first, congratulations on the 10 years of sobriety. That's a hell of a milestone. And the difficulty in that needs to be celebrated. To your question, it's different for everyone, and this is where I have to kind of take I think an unfortunate break between what we know rationally and logically and what we know with emotions and feelings. The space that somebody is in when they are in a serious depression and when they are considering suicide as an option to end the pain that they are currently in. Edwin Schneidman, who is the father of modern suicidology, he called it thanatology, a study of death, but he in the 60s and 70s started researching the notes that people would leave and trying to get a sense of the mindset of somebody beforehand. And the biggest thing that he noticed was what he called emotional tunnel vision, and it was emotional constriction, where you know, to give people a sense of this, you're in this deep, dark tunnel with emotion-wise, and logically, you know that people care about you. That's the unfortunate thing, and creates more shame and more stigma and a sense that you can't talk about this to anybody, because you know that in my case, my parents love me, my sister loves me, my friends care about me, you know, my dog loves me unconditionally. Like, these things are stuff that I know in my head. And there's a difference between knowing that in your heart, and that's what depression starts robbing you of in that particular space. And that's where the disconnect comes, and the danger can be, because you genuinely, you're emotionally numb, and people think that depression is sadness, and it's not. It's this weird numbness where you can touch somebody physically, but you cannot feel any emotion coming out of you or coming to you. And it's, for such an ultra social species that we are, and that we rely on such social connection, and why we're seeing, certainly with the continued lockdowns and COVID protocols, this is messing with people's ability to connect. This depression just robs you of your ability to feel those emotions. And then you get to the point where you're like, logically, rationally, everything else in life can be grand, which is where I was about a year and a half ago. And then everything else fell apart in my head. But logically, I'm going, no, all this stuff is, my life is okay, and people care about me, but it didn't matter because I couldn't feel it. And the tough thing about being in your space, to directly address the question you asked, like, what can somebody do there? Oh, that it's such a hard question, because it really does. It's so dependent on the structures that somebody has around them. If anything that I've learned in my 15 years is that if my potential for suicidality up until, let's say, last year with the ECT has kind of always been constant, the degree to which I could be lethal towards myself was very varied, right? So it's like, if I was having these consistent suicidal thoughts, but I might be in a space when I was 24 and I had a handgun, that's lethality is way up here. And I purposefully made this so I was going to be away from family, be away from friends. The folks I knew were going to be out of state. So that ratchets up that lethality. And the maybe best tip that I can give anybody in that space, or somebody who's concerned about a friend or a family member, loved one, however you want to say it, is that you need to develop more social structures that aren't dependent on you reaching out. There needs to be people checking in on you. So my sister is my biggest one. She and I check in on each other regularly. And I've given her and about 4 or 5 other people in my family, my friends, who have the right to ask me repeatedly how I'm doing. And if I blow them off, that's a signal, I've told them, that they have to keep on asking that question, because I will be in that space again. I may not be suicidal, but I will be in that depressive space where I don't want to talk to you, where I physically can't. And if I'm not the one, if I can't reach out, then I have to give permission to others to do that for me, which is why when I lived in an apartment that didn't have a lock, it had a key code entry thing. My mom, dad, and my sister all had the key code entry. And if I didn't answer a text for a day or two, they had permission to come over and come into the apartment. And that happened a few times. And it's frustrating as hell as a 32-year-old man to have your mom come in when you're sleeping and want to be dead to the world. But that's the route that I've had to take to protect myself from myself. So I'd say I can't make good decisions in a depressive space. I don't believe anyone can. You need to be able to offload that to other people that you trust.
Right.
For sure. And so you're talking about family and that support structure. And I think that's very important too, especially us. I love the point you made about being in such a ultra social species. I think that's very important, and we've seen a lot of evidence of that over the past year, so especially with all the different lockdowns and some of the results and consequences from that. But going back to that social structure, I'm curious, because you said you and your sister, that you guys are very close, you check in on each other, and I think that's great. Have you ever talked to your sister or talked to your family about what their headspace was at when you were going through these thoughts and these problems at such a young age?
Yes, they were scared.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the biggest emotion, was just unequivocated fear. So when I was 21 or 22 was my attempt with hanging. And I didn't tell anybody that day, and I got down off the stool, and I'm like, I'm not going to tell anyone. And when I woke up the next morning, everybody kind of knew something was up, because I was so freaking out of it. I mean, I was this close to stepping off, right? And you don't just bounce back the next day and be able to put on a happy. psychologically, I don't think anybody's that strong. I certainly wasn't. And so I'm like, what's going on? I'm like, I tried to hang myself last night, and that just that was if there was a wrecking ball in any kind of conversation, that certainly was it.
Yeah.
And they were like, what? Because they knew they didn't, I'd taken medication for depression. I still didn't have a formal diagnosis yet.
Sure.
But we kind of knew like Gordon's having some mental illness, and my folks were still struggling with like, is this still kind of like a real thing? And I was still going on like pissed off that I even had this thing. And
yeah.
So between a lot of the anger and the fear was just like, we don't know what the heck to do. So, when I dropped that bomb on them, the first thing they did was my mom called my therapist, who I'd been seeing for about 3 years at that time. And she was the only one who had known about where my head had been suicidally.
Gotcha.
As far as like that's the track that my thoughts were going. And so this came out of the blue for my parents as far as they were concerned. And so my mom called my therapist, and I'm 21 at the time, 22, and she goes, okay, we need an emergency appointment for Gordon. And he's like, okay, cool. We'll get him in an hour. And she's like, and my mom's like, I want to be in the room. The woman's like, you can't.
Yeah.
He's not a minor. And my mom was like, that's ridiculous. And she's like, that's the law.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm like, that's what's going to happen here. And then so I went in and I talked with my therapist for a good little while. And then she's like, I really recommend an inpatient psychiatric stay. Here's where I'd recommend you go in the state. And then my folks took me in the truck. We drove down there. And the next thing I know, I'm getting searched. I get my shoes and my laces taken off, and they give me some comfy socks with little treads on the bottom of them. I'm not allowed any sharp objects. I'm being checked in on every 15 minutes, night and day. And that was my first day in a psychiatric hospital, which was not what I originally expected it to be. And I also never expected, I was in there, I'm like, I'm never coming back to this space again. And looking back, I've been in 6 different hospitalizations in 4 different hospitals in 2 different states.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it's been a huge learning process for my family, a huge just coming to terms with this, coming to terms with a family history of this. My mother deals with depression, anxiety. My grandfather, who's a child of the Depression, dealt with severe depression his entire life. And we didn't learn about this until like my second hospitalization. He was like, yeah, I take Wellbutrin. We're like, what? This would have been valuable information to know. So based on that is again a lot of the reasons why I especially enjoy speaking with adolescents, but also connecting with their parents and their caregivers and their guardians of there's a lot that can be shown symptom-wise that a younger individual might not understand, or again doesn't have the verbiage to explain it, but can be perceived with a critical enough eye. And this is also something where when I talk about suicide, I'm like, this is a scary topic, but we don't have to be scared of it when we're talking about it. And that's what I try to bring to all the conversations I have, and certainly to podcasts like yours, where I'm trying to take the fear out of this fearful thing and just talk about how we can reasonably address it with the people that we care about. And my family's been through a huge learning curve. I've been through a huge learning curve. This thing that could have split us apart has brought us much closer together. And I'm fortunate now that, I hope to live in Georgia the rest of my life. My sister's got a house in Dunwoody. My parents live in Roswell. We're pretty nearby. These are good things for us as a family, but also for me and my permanent recovery. But I'm trying to shorten the learning curve so that other kids and other families don't have to have as much unnecessary suffering, in my mind, if they're dealing with the mental illness of a loved one.
For sure, man. For sure. I'm glad you're in Georgia, close to your family. I think that's going to help a lot. I mean, wow. I mean, again, that's such a amazing story, to be honest with you. It's very powerful, I think, too. I think that, so my next question kind of is, you talked about different ways to kind of help deal with everything that's going on, different tips that you give, speaking to people. So I'm curious, and, I looked at your website and I thought it was very well put together. And
Thank you.
I'm curious, so like you're coming up with different ways and tips. Is that kind of the origin story of mentallyagile.com?
In a sense,
So
the term mental agility actually comes back to when I was about 16. And
Okay.
so I played lacrosse all through high school, a little bit into college. But my first love from a physical standpoint was martial arts. And I trained in Muay Thai kickboxing and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at a local gym up the street for 6-7 years, where I'd go right after school. I'd speed to the gym because this was the place where I felt most at home. I didn't feel good at high school, in high school with my peers, and I didn't I felt safe at home, but I also felt like I still got to put on a bit of a face for my family's sake, right?
Okay.
But at the gym, I could just, the music would pump, I get some exercise, and I just get to engage with a lot of people that shared a passion. And also, for some reason, as a 16-year-old, I could relate to 30 and 40 and 50-year-olds way better than I could my fellow 16 and 17-year-olds. Old soul in that space. But I would spend 2 hours kickboxing and 3 hours rolling in jiu-jitsu a night.
Wow.
Every day. And then I would come home at like 11 o'clock at night, maybe do some homework, wake up at 6 a.m., repeat the whole process. And when I was kickboxing and learning how to kickbox and getting into sparring, my instructor, Stevie B, we would spar. And this is a guy who he could whip my rear end 10 ways from Sunday.
Yeah.
But he was a great teacher. And so we're sparring, he's punching me repeatedly in the face. And I'm standing there, my feet in concrete, trying to execute like the perfect cover, block, return, whatever, because I was real obsessed with technique. I still am.
Yeah.
I'm a technician in that sense. And he smacks me in the face again. He goes, "Gordon, are you ever going to move?" And I go, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, when I do this, you can move that way." And I'm like, so like the sense of bobbing and weaving and being able to cover up and move my angle to avoid a attack and then be able to attack on my own terms without damage. That was the seed of mental agility. And when my story went public in Lacrosse magazine and I started to realize that I wanted to do some more writing personally, but more advocacy work on my own terms and in my own words, that was where I was like, you know what? That's the mentality that I want to create, because in the sporting world, at least, it's all about mental toughness, which is great. But we don't teach. We just say gut it out, grit it out, rub some dirt on it, and that's great for a professional athlete or an exceptional college athlete. But it's not great for an 8-year-old or a 16-year-old who's still learning what it is they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
Mental toughness is great if you know what to do already and you can put your head down and execute. But when you're still learning the techniques, it doesn't help you when you're in that space in any kind of competitive environment. To try to just bowl through it, you need to be able to have a fuller sense of strategy and be able to move yourself. So I say, in the same way that we move the body, I'm going to teach how to move the mind, because there are several strategies from all over the freaking place, and I'm still excited to learn new ways that I can address my depression, my anxiety, my suicidal ideation, but also just the general stressors in my life. And that's where mental agility really comes into. I'm doing a talk tomorrow at the U.S. Lacrosse Convention, virtually, of course.
Very cool.
And it's all about coaching agile minds. And I'm teaching coaches how to approach teaching adolescents how to deal with their thoughts more effectively without just constantly getting punched in the face by them, because that's just going to drain their energy. So I've got not a better way, just a different way. And if we can combine those mental agility and mental toughness down the road, much more likely that individuals are going to persevere and be successful in whatever way they want to go about life.
Man, you break it down so simply. It sounds like it's just so easy. You know what I mean? I think that's awesome. Remind me also not to mess with you in the gym. I think you would. I think you would tear me apart. But in your latest blog, you talk about why we should eliminate the word "should." I'm hoping maybe you kind of can expand on that for us, my personal benefit, and for our listeners as well.
Certainly. So why we should eliminate the word "should"? I like pithy titles. So when I get a chance to be a little ironic with titles, I go for it. I have found "should" to be almost as damaging for my mental health as the word "only." So again, to go back to Edwin Schneidman, he said probably one of the biggest predictors of suicidality in an individual is their use of the word only, as like, this is the only solution for me. I only have one path forward. If I can't do this, then suicide is the only path, right? So that's
Right.
a quote unquote danger word that should set off alarm bells in other people's heads. Should is a very similar word for me, and I am very conscious about how I use that word when it pops into my mind, when I hear it from other people. And I'll take you back to maybe 23 or so, when I'm still with my long-term therapist,
Okay.
and I'm going through all the stuff where it's okay. So I've been to 2 different colleges. I've had 4 different majors at this point in time. All my friends have graduated. Some are getting married. People are being successful. I'm still looking at a boatload of medical, credit card debt. I don't have a degree. I'm still living in my parents' basement. I'm not exactly executing life the way a fairly privileged American white male should be able to do at 23, 24 years old, right? So I'm
Right.
feeling all this societal pressure, but also then personal pressure of fulfilling all these expectations from society, my family, and certainly from myself. And I was doing all these should statements. I should be here in life. I should be doing this. I should be doing that. And even on the small sense, like I should be working out at 5 o'clock in the morning every morning for an hour, and then I should be taking, eating healthily more, and all these shoulds. And so I'm just piling these on myself in the therapy session, and my therapist was like, "Hey, Gordon, time out. When are you going to stop shoulding all over yourself?" And I love dark humor. I think as a depressive, it has certainly gotten me out of a lot of binds, or at least allowed me to stay alive. Yeah. And so that's my flavor of humor, and also the ones that are just kind of cutting in an unexpected way. And that shook me. I was stunned. I couldn't. I'm like, wait, what? And I realized then that I had been shitting all over myself,
Yeah.
with the word should. And piling these expectations on top of expectations on top of unrealistic expectations, and taking things to such a logical extreme that it didn't make any sense, and there was no possible way I was going to be able to either achieve or meet those goals. Right? There's no chance. And then I was using that as a reason for why my life wasn't worth living, and why I was a burden to my parents and my sister and my friends. Right? And then that becomes a reason for why I should end my life by suicide. So
Gotcha.
Should for me is a dangerous word, and I don't, when I'm coaching, I don't allow my players to use it in a space like, oh, I should have made that catch. It's like, replace that in my way. It doesn't always fit in terms of like the syntax, but I don't really care. I replace should with the word need.
Okay.
So when I tell somebody like, you should go do this, when I'm observing an official or when I'm critiquing somebody and something, I don't say you should do this. Because it does put me in a bit of a superior position when I get to say that, right? That's just kind of the nature of that word. It comes from the old English word skilled, which to me sounds a lot like scold.
Yeah.
It has these negative connotations, and I'm a believer in the power of words and language to evoke emotions and drive people in a way they might not otherwise consider.
Yeah.
And when I say, I'd like you to try doing it this way, or I'll invite you to give this a shot, or I'd like to see you think about needing to do it in this fashion. Right?
Yeah.
The word need for me is a much more powerful social connector. Number one, where I tell folks stuff like, I want you to do this. I really need you on this thing. It tends to draw people more to your side and your perspective, I've found.
For sure. I think so.
And it also, it's not it puts you on the same level as that individual, whatever it is that you're doing or critiquing or helping them out with. But I'm so attuned now to, in the same way that I can do cognitive behavioral therapy thought records in my head after doing that for a decade now. Yeah. The word should sends out alarm bells in my head when I hear it, and when I think it. That is a chance for me to say, that's a stop sign in my mind where I go, do I really need to phrase it this way? Is this something I really do need to be doing? And then that tells me, is like, if I don't need to, cool, I can forget about it. It's not a problem. If I do, then that changes how I go with that. And if it's somebody else coming on to me, I go, do I care about this person's opinion? And I have about 5 people in my life where, from like a personal thing, where they're allowed to critique me on like how I'm behaving. And sure. I will respond to that as just like, that's a that is an opinion I value. And now that I live in kind of a semi-public space with mental health, anybody can comment on my stuff, and I welcome that. But the internet is a cesspool for commentary.
For sure. It's a wonderful place.
Yeah, and so is refereeing. Like, I've spent 15 years just getting yelled at for doing my job and doing it well, and to be able to take that kind of energy, absorb it, redirect it is another way that I say mental agility is superior in that space to mental toughness in that manner. But the thing about should is I really despise that word. It has done me a great disservice, and I do not wish to put that on other people. So I'm very careful about my use of it.
Yeah. Wow. Very very, very thought-provoking stuff there. I'll definitely have to take that. I think that's interesting, because when you say should, it's almost like kind of trapping yourself in a way. I don't know. It seems very, especially when you're talking about the leading into I can only do this or this. You know what I mean? Instead of kind of thinking outside the box, like, well, you could move this way and avoid the hit. You know, it's either
there's an interesting, when you talk about kind of moving on that one. So I've been reading a lot more about evolutionary and biological physiology over time, and I forget his name, it might be Andrew Huberman. But so when you're in that fight or flight stress response, which is all you're in a depressive state, you get that emotional tunnel vision I talked about, but you also get like this constricted actual tunnel vision, right?
Yeah.
You can call it shell shock, you can call it PTSD, call it 1,000-yard stare. Every generation has called it something a little bit different. But physiologically, you get locked into this very small, narrow perception of things. So he's like, one of the easier ways to break out of that when you're in that space is to start looking at your peripheral vision and moving your eyes left to right, physically moving them.
Okay.
And that, again, trips a thing where when you're relaxed and the parasympathetic nervous system is turned on, your gaze is naturally wider. And as much as we like to think that the body can control the mind, there's so many ways that the body goes towards the mind as well. And so I'm in a space, I do it with breathing exercises predominantly, but I've also been in a space where if you can take intentionally, when you're feeling yourself constricted mentally, to physically widen your gaze and look left to right, you're going to start seeing that heart rate go down. You're going to start seeing your thoughts slow down. And that's just from a pure how the body reacts to stresses and relaxation, and then that can feed back into your brain and being like, no, everything's cool right now. You can think it's all right.
It's we could think it's all good. Chelsea, did you have something? I'm sorry, it looked like you. Okay.
No, I do like your semicolon on your vest. So I don't and so I don't know what that means, but do you want to go ahead and let our listeners know the significance of what that means?
Sure. So Project Semicolon is really a grassroots program. That and the organization To Ride Love on Her Arms are two really grassroots suicide prevention advocacy organizations. And they're ones I'm a fan of because I enjoy the written word, and in my experience, and certainly in my own writing, the semicolon is criminally underused in English and criminally misunderstood. So the semicolon is used in writing for when an author wants to take a sentence and pause it and then continue on with a related sentence, right?
Okay.
But they don't want something as final as a period. It's like these things are connected to each other. So with when I got exposed to Project Semicolon, the way they put it is that the suicidal individual, the person who attempted suicide or has lost someone too, get the semicolon tattoo, or in my case a pin, because I enjoy lapel pins as much as vests, is that's the person who's the author of their story chooses to put a semicolon, a pause, and then continue their life.
Makes sense.
That is the use of the semicolon. And the interesting thing is of this one, so I've got this full forearm, full sleeve tattoo of Dante's Inferno, which I've written about and is a poem that I love to read every year. But the semicolon tattoo was the first piece of it. I got that, so I didn't have this whole forearm bit. And I'd go to like the grocery store and like, somebody, they'd be doing that and they catch that when I pull out my credit card or my cash. And then the cashier would like turn around and she'd like point to the semicolon like right behind her ear, or like somebody would see it at a convention and they just kind of nod and I'd nod back. It's this kind of really subtle underground thing for folks who just know what it means, which is just a really cool way to kind of bond with strangers. But then at the same time, I've had folks like, oh, what does that mean? And I give them that short explanation, and they're like, man, I'm really glad you're still around. Thanks. And I'm like, cool. And like, I don't know this person, but it's still another element of connection that I wouldn't have had otherwise. So that's the semicolon bit, and the whole tattoo, I'm covered generally. But the forearm tattoo and the scenes that it has and some of the quotes that I've got on it are reminders for me on how I want to live my life day to day. But also mental illness, my depression is invisible unless I'm severely depressed, in which case it's pretty obvious. But I have a great way of hiding the early and middle stages of my stuff. I'm really good at that. This is a way to put my mental illness visible. And gives me an opportunity for people to be able to be like, what's that mean? And I'm like, well, here you go. And then here's a little bit about my story. And they're like, oh, and then that kind of opens them up in that space as well. So it's me just kind of, putting my colors out there, so to speak.
Naturally kind of breaking the ice there as well.
Yeah, very much so.
Very much. Awesome. So I noticed that we've thought about at something that we do with our podcast and our ministries about starting a blog. So we've had some discussions about that before. And I'm curious because I saw your blog and we talked a little bit about eliminating the word should. What made you want to start that? And what do you find that the best part about writing one is?
Well, it's interesting. The big thing is that you want to, it's not about trying to grow just the blog. It's do you actually want to write? Like that, I would think would be the thing that kind of like, if folks are interested in that, like, yeah, you might have a good idea, but if you don't have just enjoy the writing process, don't do it. It's you're not going to enjoy yourself.
Right, it can't be a chore.
Right. And so I had been writing, so my family ran a youth lacrosse league called Atlanta Youth Lacrosse, and I wrote maybe 400 articles from the time I was a teenager into my mid-20s, just writing stuff. And then when I went to U.S. Lacrosse, I would do the same thing. I was writing technical manuals and guides and blog posts about explaining to people what officiating is, how to honor the game, different ways to approach things. So I've always been attracted to writing in that space. And my sister as well. She's the best editor I know. So if I got big things, I'll send that to her and she'll help me edit it down. But the blog for me is a way for me to, like, I'm a field advocate for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. I donate to NAMI and a couple other organizations, and these are great. And I've done some talks for them that are pre-prepared speeches that I kind of follow through, and they're educational, right? And that's great in one sense. And then for the part of me that's kind of stubborn and I kind of like to do things kind of my own way and my own flavor, the blog allows me that outlet, and it's twofold. It lets me do that, and then it allows me to continue being introspective in a healthy way. Mm-hmm. So I spent a lot of time in the dark, deep recess corners of my brains having it out with my depression. Now with the blog, and with some of the videos I do of showing different techniques, whether it's cold immersion therapy or breathing exercises or the mammalian dive reflex, whatever it might be, it allows me to snap myself out of, to take me out of the emotion that I'm feeling in what I'm at and approach it from a logical sense. So I wrote the whole time I was in the psychiatric hospital at Skyland Trail. I wrote a 4-month blog series called Treatment Life, where I was from the hospital and my experiences with ECT to my time in the group home to my time in the inpatient or the outpatient, intensive outpatient program.
Yeah.
And going there every day and doing 8 hours of therapy every day for my full-time job until my brain was in a healthy space. That was a way for me to analyze myself in a very safe way, and also for me to be able to look back now and go, okay, this is kind of where I was, this is where I am now, this is good. But it also helps. I know I'm helping some folks who reach out to me and be like, hey, I read your blog, or my son, my daughter's scheduling this, and I now feel like I have some language that I can approach them with in a healthy fashion. I'm like, cool, now we're lowering the learning curve. Now we're decreasing unnecessary suffering in my mind. We're making it more likely that someone's going to live a more fulfilling life on their terms. That's where the blog has grown into. At first, it was just an opportunity for me to kind of just scream into the void digitally. and now it's come into a space where I can really analyze. I talk about different types of cognitive distortions. I talk about different kinds of therapies, the most up-to-date data on suicide and suicide prevention, and a whole host of weird stuff that I run into that I try to tie into ways to live a life that somebody might want to live, whether they have a mental illness or not. So that's where it's grown to. I'm pretty darn happy with it, and I'm just like, if somebody wants to write a blog, cool. Just want to write in the process.
For sure, absolutely, man. Well, earlier you kind of spoke about like different strategies and different ways to kind of think and kind of train the mind. I'm wondering, what's your personal go-to strategy for yourself on if you find yourself kind of in one of those depressive states? Is it the eyes? Is it like, like moving your eyes a little bit? Is it just going somewhere different, or what's your personal go-to?
That's a relatively new one. So I'd say that isn't as maybe automatic as some others.
Okay.
I'm still kind of playing around with that one. The one that is my go-to, and I use this on the field and refereeing. I use this before having difficult conversations with people. I use this before getting into, or before I start my car engine, is just breath work.
Okay.
And it sounds so freaking simple, but I'm like, this is the one thing we carry with us, regardless of if we're wearing anything or not. We're always breathing.
Yeah.
And this is a thing that's under some degree of conscious control that we can use that body to brain connection to be able to influence our thoughts for the better. So I use that to de-stress all the time. Probably the one that it took my dad for a loop. So when I was still at US Lacrosse, we had a West Coast lacrosse convention. We had it in Las Vegas. My dad had been there a time or two before. I had never been. I know it's not my scene already going into it. There's bright flashing lights and a whole bunch of people and loud noises. I don't like any of that stuff. Right?
Yeah.
Very small bursts. So we're walking through because we were like, all right, we'll gamble a little bit because I've never done this. You got to do that at least once. I feel let's just enjoy that.
Let's go for it. Yeah.
So after spending the $20 surcharge at the casino ATM, we hit the floor and did some gambling. But the whole time we're walking through the Bellagio, I'm doing breathing exercises. I'm doing circle breathing. I'm making sure my exhales are longer than my inhales. I'm doing some breath holds and different diaphragmatic breathings, as well as muscle tension or relaxation. I pair that as well. And then we go to the slot machines. We do some of that. And we go to the blackjack table and do some of that. And then I wrote up a post about how I was doing that. And my dad was like, what? He was like, I was like, yeah. He was just like, I had no idea. I'm like, yeah, that's why I do it, because it's not like I don't have to like sit and meditate in the middle of the Bellagio, atrium, and draw attention to myself in that space. That's not going to help my anxiety, but I can calm myself down in a way that nobody notices, and is remarkably effective for lowering my stress levels and letting me think more clearly. I do that whether I'm, I do that in the moment. If I'm feeling a panic attack coming on, more often than not, I can breathe myself out of it. If not, I always have an emergency Klonopin somewhere. Or I do that preventatively. So for example, when I get into my car, before I turn the engine on, I'll do 3 to 5 really deep diaphragmatic breathing exercises. And it's remarkable how much calmer my drive to wherever I'm going is.
Wow.
And
yeah.
It takes all of 15 seconds, and I just have a much better ride. So that's my go-to.
Hey, you know what? If you give 15 seconds to have a much smoother ride anywhere you're going, I feel like that's a good investment.
Yeah,
that's
it
great.
Works out.
We actually had a counselor on one time. His name was Harold Boggs, and he talked about the importance of breathing and breathing through the nose, and so he was practicing that as well. So I definitely need to, need to.
There you go. I like that. Cool.
Start working on some of the breathing exercises. Well, hey man, I saw on your website that you talk about philosophy, and so I'm wondering, do you have a favorite philosopher? And if you do, and I don't know if anybody's asked this before, but is there a specific quote that's stuck with you throughout your life?
I have it tattooed where I can read it every day when I need a reminder.
Nice.
And all it is, so my favorite philosopher is, in my opinion, the only real philosopher king that there's ever been, Marcus Aurelius, who was a practicing Stoic. And I took a different approach to this. So there's been a kind of a renaissance in Stoic philosophy lately. The Daily Stoic comes up. There's a lot of stuff, and it appeals very much to folks who are have served in the military in some capacity or any type of real dangerous type job where they need to be able to separate kind of those stresses from the rest of their lives and not bring that home with them, kind of deal.
Yeah.
So we're seeing a bit of a renaissance on that, and I enjoy, the quote is, confine yourself to the present. And it's just a reminder that the future isn't here yet. It doesn't actually exist. And the past, to use a quote from Orson Scott Card's character, the past is a woven tapestry that cannot be unwoven. So you only have this present moment, and that's the biggest thing with all meditation, really all philosophy, all yoga, is trying to enjoy just the present, and that's remarkably difficult for us to do. Again, I think because of somehow we evolved to survive from a biological standpoint. But I teach students, I go, the mind itself is skewed to the negative. It does that naturally. Like, you can remember so many more bad things that happened to you last week than you can good things. You have to work harder to remember the good things. I could go long into the psychological reasons for that. But that's just that's how the brain is. And so we have to work knowing that bias, and confine yourself to the present is a way that I use to remind myself. I'm like, I don't need to go down the rabbit hole of what ifs. That's just going to stress me out even more. And I don't need to ruminate, which is the kind of the hallmark of depression, of just going back into these things of again, I should have done this, I should have done that, and wallowing in those regrets. So it's, can you be in the present moment and just enjoy breathing or doing whatever it is you're doing? And the reason I picked Marcus Aurelius as my favorite philosopher is that it's interesting to me, because I think it's easy to go like, you see the folks, the Buddha would be a good example of this one, but then any type of ascetic or ascetic who is, we tend to look at folks who are like in the present moment as folks who remove themselves from society as much as possible, right? Who say, I'm going to renounce all worldly pleasures. I'm going to renounce my responsibilities. I'm going to just focus on learning this philosophy and embodying this as best as I can. And that kind of didn't really stick, because I'm just like, I don't think there's space for that personally in my life. Like I can't just retreat from everything. And I also can't just be, I feel it would be a disservice with the skills that I have to just shut myself out from the world and try to embody a particular philosophy or school of thought. Marcus Aurelius appeals to me because he was, at the time, the single most powerful human being on the planet. If he wanted all the gold in Rome, he could order it and it would be delivered to him. He could order any woman in any harem was his if he wanted to. He could eat any freaking thing he wanted, regardless of the season. It would be brought to him, right?
Yeah.
That is ridiculous when you get down to it. Just like to have that kind of power as a human being meant that he had no peer. Everybody came to him wanting something. And so he stepped back and he said, okay, how am I going to live my life? He actually quotes in his memoirs, Meditations, which was never meant to be published. So it's kind of like really getting into his mind that he expected to be just talking to himself for the rest of his life. He's like, he felt he had the misfortune to be born the emperor of Rome. And because he wanted to study philosophy, that's what he enjoyed, but he had all these other obligations and responsibilities to people. And he said, so I'm going to make it my mission then to live the best possible life that I can. And he confined yourself to the present, just one of them, but the breath of wisdom that comes from that, of just saying like, this person willingly wasn't a dick.
Yeah.
And didn't just take advantage for his own gain. He made the best out of what some would consider something like winning the lottery every day for your life.
For real.
He made the best out of that in a way that I don't think has ever really been seen in any certainly Western ruler that I've studied. And that's why I gravitate to him, because I say, like, you know what? If he had the responsibility over millions of souls in one of the largest empires ever, and that he can live a good, measured, responsible life and still maintain his responsibilities and his duties, then then I can do that with the lesser things that I have to worry about.
Yeah, instead of an entire empire. Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Very
What I have is a bit more manageable.
something a bit more manageable day to day. Very good. Well, man. Before we kind of wrap up here, I just have my kind of one final question, and that is, you spoke. We talked about kind of your speaking engagements that you've done before in your workshops. So you've spoken to people such as Eastern Oregon University's women lacrosse team, Pace Academy, and the National Association of Sports Officials. Is there a specific moment that stands out to you from any of those speaking engagements that really sits with you and resonates with you? Bit of a loaded question.
That is. I'm going back now to those talks, and I think the one when I spoke with Pace. So I spoke in their auditorium. So about the 400 students in the upper school.
Yeah.
And this was the school I had gone to. I graduated from Pace in 2006, so I could talk. I was I was in their seats, quite literally, and it was an excellent talk, and I felt I connected with them well, and they responded to what I was saying well. But then the more impactful thing was, so I stayed for the whole day there. They gave me an unused classroom and said, hey, if anybody wants to just go talk to Gordon and dig more into this stuff, go for it. And I had a couple students come on by over the course of the day, and yeah, with their high school problems, sure. But I was trying to give them some perspective and some, again, other ways to address what they were directly going through. And then my old history teacher, I'm walking out of the building. I'm ready to leave for the day. And it was last period, and my teacher, Ms. Smith, from my history and my AP Poli-Sci class, physically grabs me and pulls me into the room. Like, we need your help. I go, okay. And it's like half the room looked like they were on the verge of tears. Like the stress was palpable.
Yeah, you feel it.
In that room. And she was just like, I don't even feel good about starting a lesson right now. Is there anything you can do to kind of help us out here? I'm like, yeah, sure. Let's turn off the lights, and I'll lead everybody through a 10-minute meditation. And I did. And we got done with it, and there were misty eyes throughout the whole room, and this one girl just looked at me. I was just like, so how do y'all feel? And she was like, I feel so good. And I could visibly see the weight come off of her shoulders, and the energy in that room just got so much more serene. And just to be able to introduce to 10 students a way to take a little bit of the weight off their shoulders meant the world to me, because that was what I wish I would have had when I was in those seats as well. So that's probably still the most impactful moment for me in what I was doing, because it showed that this stuff does work, and it does show that young people are capable of taking, maybe not control of their thoughts. I still don't really think that's there, but taking the reins more strongly and being able to guide their thoughts in a more responsible fashion. That is well within their and anybody else's capabilities.
Wow. Amazing stuff. Well, Gordon, thank you so much for coming on the show, man. We really do appreciate it. I enjoyed talking with you, and I felt the things that you talked about eliminating the word should. And I mean, gosh, man, what a story, right? All the way back to in your early years. And it was great having you on, man. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, man. I enjoyed our chat, and look forward to seeing where your podcast grows in the future.
Hey, us too, man. We're getting there slowly but surely. But before we go, if you want to take a minute and kind of go ahead and plug anything that you wanted to plug to our very limited audience at the moment, but just where can we find you? What do you got going on? What's next for you?
Sure. So anybody can go to my website, mentallyagile.com. My email address is gcorsetti@mentallyagile.com. And then I'm all over the main social medias. So Facebook and Instagram is @mentallyagile. Twitter is mental_agility, and LinkedIn is just Gordon Corsetti. So that's just the professional front for
sure.
me on that one. But you can just Google me. I will pop up. If you just Google my name, I've written enough now that Google spiders can find me. And I love hearing from folks. I love getting new ideas for therapies and techniques I might not have heard of, because I use myself as a guinea pig. So send me stuff, send me ideas, send me troubles, whatever. And then I can use that to kind of craft the next round of stuff that hopefully goes out and helps people.
Very, very cool. Well, thank you so much, Gordon, again for coming on. Guys, we're going to have links down to mentallyagile.com and some of his socials down in the description below. So if you guys want to go ahead and check him out, send him an email, get him on your podcast. He's a good guest and always fun to talk to. But guys, I think, Chelsea, do you have anything else before we kind of wrap on up?
No, I'm good. I greatly appreciate your time. And I think for our viewers, one of the biggest things that we try to do in the ministry is gain as many perspectives as possible. I think we're all kind of firm believers in perspective being one of the most powerful tools, to be able to reach as many as we can. And so I greatly appreciate your time and your perspective.
Love it all.
My pleasure.
Wonderful words to kind of end the show, guys. You can find us where all podcasts can be heard. Places like Apple, Spotify, Google. We're all over the place. Just look us up at Spiraling Podcast, and we hope to see you guys on the next one. You guys have a wonderful rest of your day. Goodbye.